If you're watching this on Moodle or you're floated by on YouTube, a very warm welcome. My name is Rory Lees-Oakes and today I'm at the Manchester Institute for Psychotherapy with psychotherapist Bob Cooke, and we're talking about transference. Okay, now I know from my experience of teaching learners that transference can be a tricky thing sometimes to get across, and the concept of that transference and counter-transference. So Bob, what is transference?
Well, that's a good question, and you're correct actually, that a lot of people find the concept of transference challenging. And let's go back.
Okay.
Let's just go back. Now, the father of psychology is really, let's go back to Sigmund Freud.
Right.
Now, Freud, who was around, wrote his first book in 1888 on hysteria.
Mm-hmm.
He really coined the word transference. And it's the idea, of course, that we transfer onto other people our thoughts, beliefs, images from yesterday.
Yes.
So here's an example from a clinical practice from last week. One of my clients came in, middle-aged woman who I've been seeing for, I think about 5 months. And she came in, she sat down, she said, "Bob, I've got something to say to you." So I said, "What?" And she said, "When I was talking to you last week, and we were talking about, or we were actually talking about sex and safe sex, etc. I felt just like a 3-year-old talking to my father."
Yes.
So in that moment of time, though she's 46, she felt just like she was 3. And then later 13, as she grew up a bit, teenager, talking to her dad. So I said to her, "Oh wow, tell me how your dad was." "My dad was nothing like you." I said, "What do you mean?" "Well, in some ways I felt like I was 3 talking to my dad at the time when you looked at me quizzically, just like he looked at me."
Right.
Even though, of course, you're largely not like him,
Yes.
because you treat me much kindly. So, however, let's go back. So in that moment when she said, "I felt like a 3-year-old talking to my father," even though she was a 46-year-old talking to me, she'd gone to another time zone. And she was transferring across how she felt all those years ago to present time.
Yes, the presenting past.
That's a wonderful terminology that Alan Jacobs used. And the past is presented in the present.
Yes, yes. So, I'll give an example. That's a really good example. And I'd like to come back to that 3 and 13 jump. I can remember teaching a group, and if this person's watching, I'm sure you remember the conversation. And I was teaching a group of level 2 students, and I noticed that one student was becoming a little withdrawn. Every time I asked her something, she looked kind of afraid, and this sometimes happens in classes where people have ideas of teaching from the way they were taught as children. And one evening where I was ready to go and all the other learners had gone, and she'd hung back and she said, "Rory," she said, "do I irritate you?" And I said, sit down. And I said, what am I doing that gives you the idea that I'm irritating you? And she said, "Just think you are." And I said, "Who do I remind you of?"
Yes.
And she said, "My dad." And I said, "Tell me about your dad."
Yeah, so you're straight in.
Straight in, yes. And she said to me, "Well, he was a big guy." I said, "Okay, all right, so far so good." He told rubbish jokes and had a really weird sense of humour.
Well, there we are.
Okay, well there we are. "What else?" I said to her, "Bob. What else?" And he said, he put me down and he said that I was an irritant and he didn't respect me. And I said, "Have I done that?" And she said, "No." And you know what I said to her, Bob?
What?
"I am not your
dad."
father." Yes.
Correct. So you're getting some examples of transfers?
Yes.
Okay. So when the past is presented in the present.
Yes.
So why is transference so important for psychotherapists? Okay, let's go back a bit and let's make a statement. Transference happens throughout the whole of life, not just in the psychotherapy counselling world.
Absolutely.
You know, outside in the real world, I've got transference on red buses. In the sense, when I was a kid, I always used to be anxious about a red bus arriving on time to take me to school, which sometimes still today I can remember. That would be transference. So why, but in the psychotherapy world, why is transference so important? Transference is so important, exactly why Rory just said it. So when somebody comes in talking about X, like, you know, are you irritated with me? You can take it straight back to their anxieties and fears from yesterday, which get placed on the real situation. And that's what happens throughout life. Now the problem comes for a lot of people is when they get the two time zones mixed up. So in other words, in this example with Rory, this whole process didn't help her learn because she was afraid of the critical parent ahead, withdrew, and never really met Rory in real life because Rory represented that critical parent.
Yes.
So her learning was not enhanced.
No. And it was interesting that after that conversation, the whole relationship changed. She saw me as Rory, not her father. And it was amazing the different person that came into class the next week. It was almost as if a new person had arrived in class.
Yeah, well, it is a new person
It
because
is.
they're actually in the here and now.
Absolutely.
And not operating from some experience of yesterday.
Yes. Now let me ask you, Bob, the client you're talking about sex, and she disclosed that she felt like she was 3. Then she felt like she was 13. That passage of 10 years in her past world, is that a path that you facilitated as in the therapy she was starting to grow up? She was moving away from 3 to 13. Am I on the right track there?
Correct, completely. And that happens a lot in psychotherapy.
Right.
A good way to think about this is around the concept of neurological pathways in the brain.
Okay.
There's been a lot of research done about different neurological pathways. So for example, if we open up the brain, we would see, let's have a metaphor, a lot of electrical circuits, just like opening up a plug.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
So when you move from one part of yourself, or one neurological pathway to another, you are often jumping ages. You go from one experience to another, and it might move from 10 years or 9 years or 8 years, so you might go from 2 to 7.
Yes.
And you can do it within a second.
Yes.
And what happens is there's a trigger in the present that stimulates the neurological pathway or the part of the self which was from another time zone.
Yes. And I think one of the interesting things, it took me a little bit of time to get my head around, and if that's not a metaphor, I don't know what is, is that as humans, we do not think in a linear fashion about memories.
Good.
We can have memories that are as acute and as present 30 years ago, that come to us in the here and now, as they were then. Because the brain works like that. There's been lots of research about, certainly in post-traumatic stress, about people being brought from the past into the present they're at, but experiencing that presenting past with its emotions and its thoughts and its anxieties, or its joys in some cases.
Yes, absolutely. And of course, again, going back to why it's so important in the therapy process, let's just take a scenario.
Okay.
As you grow up, your personality is formed by making decisions about yourself in reaction to the environment and the world and parents about you.
And you'll be talking scripts now, wouldn't you, I guess, in
transaction analysis, but in normal language we'll just talk about life events which make up your personality.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right, okay. Scripts. is true as a transaction analysis, but we're really talking about a life plan. So you develop a personality based on how you interacted with people in your family,
Sure.
etc. when you're younger. Those become the tenets and central features of your personality.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you have been in a dysfunctional or difficult family system,
Mm-hmm.
you will make decisions about yourself from that distorted place,
Yes.
or that in a healthy environment. As you grow up, that's how you see the world,
Mm-hmm.
that's how you see yourself. Now, as you leave that difficult, unhealthy family system, you may not be prepared for the challenges of the social world, how to be in relationships, how to act healthily, etc., etc.
Absolutely.
And therefore you may end up seeking help, whether it be counselling, when relationships go in a difficult way, or life goes in a different way, or how you handle anxiety, or how you handle depression. All those processes, though, come back to the decisions you made in reaction to the family around you.
Absolutely.
Now, I believe for healing to happen and change to happen, the person needs to be aware of how they made those decisions all those years ago.
And I think one of the things about transference is that it's largely, in my understanding, a subconscious process.
Yeah.
So part of the therapeutic journey is to take it out of the subconscious and bring it into the
That's
conscious
right.
realm to look at
Yeah.
and to work with.
And therefore, the therapist who understands the transference, the presenting past,
Yes.
as well we just said, can help the person become more aware of how they are today in reaction to the past.
Mm.
And when the person's more aware, they've got more of a mechanism or a vehicle and a tool to change.
Yes. Yes. They're thinking from a position of now rather than the past.
Yeah. And that's a really good way to look at it. And we look at the history of transference, just for students and people who perhaps want to look more in depth at transference. Transference for a long way was seen as the analyst or the therapist analysing the presenting past in the service of what I've just talked about. However, when we got to about 1980, we moved into the world of analysts and therapists saying, whoa, what about the therapist's own thoughts, desires, wishes, and what's been evoked in the therapeutic dialogue having an effect in the therapy relationship? And they call that phenomenon counter-transference.
Yes.
Because it countered the original transference.
Yes.
And it actually, by looking at the counter-transference, or the feelings and desires which are evoked by the client in front of you, it gives you another tool to help the person become aware of how they became the way they are and their impact on other people, and i.e. relationships, so they can actually change.
Yes. And I can give you a really good example, again from one of my learners in training, and they'll know who they are, but I think it's really useful.
Yeah.
I recently was talking to a group of learners, and one of them said, my client didn't turn up. And my client didn't turn up, and I'd given my time, and and I was incredibly frustrated about this. And I said, what's your view on kind of being time wasting? I don't like it. I don't like time wasting at all. I said, and what messages in childhood did you get about wasting time? And it was like, oh, well, I was told, and all the group, because we sit in a circle, all the group said, that's counter-transference. Yeah. That's counter-transference. And I said at the time, what do you think, Bob, this practitioner needs to be thoughtful of now, going back to that client? Now we've identified that, what do you think that practitioner needs to be thoughtful of?
Wow. Besides evoking the past and the present?
Yes.
Come on, you're leading me out. What do you think?
Well, I think what I was trying to get to was the fact that it could be that when this client presents again, you're right, absolutely right, provoking the past in the present. When she sits in front of this client, what might happen is that past material from her own life fills her mind, and that irritation of being late, of someone not turning up, then completely dominates the therapeutic sphere, and it's projected in some way to the client.
Yeah. So when we talk about projection, we mean projection means when you put out
Yes.
to the other person. So you can project, oh, that person is thinking about me in this way,
Yes.
and in fact they might not be.
Yes.
So that's projection.
Yes.
Or you can project out, oh, that person's going to act in that way because they're feeling this, and they might not be.
Yes.
So everybody projects all the time. The really important thing, of course, in terms of health, is you check out your projections to see if they're true.
Yes.
So, but that's a really good example. And if we just follow transference again, so you have the development transference.
Yes.
About the 1980s, you get counter-transference.
Yes.
But I think it is important what you just said, that projection is a mechanism of transference.
Absolutely.
You can't have transference without the mechanism of projection.
Yes.
And then a very important concept came along in about end of the 1990s, which now is very, it's used a lot in the textbooks, and quite a vague term, I think, in many ways, and often used interchangeably with the wording of countertransference, but actually is part of countertransference. Starting to get a bit complex, but anyway, it's an important term we're going to come on to. And that's the idea of projective identification. So you've got transference, projection, countertransference, projective identification, all part of the transferential world, and important to talk about. So when we talk about projective identification,
Yes.
we're talking about a projection by the client onto you.
Yes.
Now, it will stay as projection if it's not picked up by the therapist and used. However, if it's picked up in an unconscious process by the therapist,
Mm-hmm.
and evokes some unresolved unconscious issues, the therapist will identify with the projection and act out. So for an example would be, if the client projected onto you, right, oh, you know, this person is, I don't know, this person has loss issues, or whatever it is, because they've had loss issues themselves. Now, if the therapist hasn't got any vulnerable processes with loss issues, having
Yes.
been adopted or haven't got fostered or
Sure.
haven't any bereavements, then you're not going to have any unresolved child
Sure.
issues or unconscious issues by the therapist.
Absolutely.
However, if they've got some loss issues, been adopted or fostered or some
Mm-hmm.
particular crisis, they may act out from a subconscious or unconscious way because of their own issues.
Sure.
And they pick up with the projections, so they identify with it,
Yes.
and then they do something out of their unconsciousness to escape those feelings, and may well take the client into an area they didn't really want to go in, say thinking or something, to escape an analysis of the feelings.
Yes.
Now that is projective identification, very similar to countertransference, but much, much more intense.
Sure. Sure. I mean, I think that's a really good description. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put an information sheet, link to an information sheet in the bar below, so that people can replay this video. We're getting into the technicalities of it. So transference on a very basic level, from my understanding, is when you meet someone who you've never met before, and they evoke feelings because they remind you maybe of someone you've had in the past. And it might be a physical resemblance, it could be a situational resemblance, you're talking about the bus. It could be something somebody says, and we always have, you pick it up, don't we, in our everyday conversations, where you may say something to someone and they say, oh, that's just like my friend Fred, he says that. And at some level there's transference, some level there's transference.
Yeah. So let's say, I'd like to end with one sentence here. Freud, and I agree, and Freud, I don't often agree with many things you say, but I'm going to agree with this, Sigmund.
I'm sure he's watching.
Yeah. Freud said, change won't happen without an analysis of the transfers. And I'm going to say, unless you use the transference, unless transference is happening, you will only have past timing. In other words, you'll be talking about things in the present, which may well be therapeutic in some senses for relief from the organism. However, real change won't happen. So transference is vitally important in an understanding of cure and service to the client.
Sure. And finally, Bob, I would say that this is why having your own therapy is so important.
Yes.
In
I'm glad you said that.
counselling courses or psychotherapy courses.
Yeah.
And as I say to my learners, you, the client, can only go as far as you are willing to go yourself.
Correct.
If there's any areas that are difficult, that are blind areas or frightening areas, then subconsciously you will avoid those, and therefore your client will be able to go there.
That's a really important point. And that's a delightful thought. And I 95% agree with it, actually. So yes, I say it a lot, I agree with it, and 95% is high level. But one bit, I think that the bit I want to add on is adaptation and hypnotic induction. In other words, the clients that over-adapt or you hypnotise might well go into areas which aren't that wonderful. Now, that's the 5% I'm talking about, and really a good training, good therapy by yourself, sense of integrity. I completely agree with you. You won't be taking clients to places they won't want to go.
Sure. And I think that really sums up.
It, really.
Well, I'll put some links in the bar below.
Oh, good.
We might put some websites in, or we might put a fact sheet in.
Yeah,
we might write a fact sheet and I'll put it in, and you can download it. It is a lot to take in, but it's well worth discussing, always worth exploring, essential for those of you who are training to be counsellors, psychotherapists. I'll bring it to an end, but finally, as always, thank you for watching.
Yeah, thank you for watching, and it's goodbye from me, and goodbye from Rory. Bye-bye.